Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Ankur Patel, and today I have with me Meredith Barnes-Cook. Meredith, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Perfect. Well, on this show, we really love to dig into some of the origin story and get more into what you do. So maybe for the audience's sake, could you just give us a quick rundown of what you did prior to doing what you do now? And then maybe if you could dig into your current experience, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I'm probably one of the few people that says that I chose insurance as a career. I've now been in the industry for about 40 years. Worked at an agency when I was in college, which where I kind of caught the insurance bug, so to speak. And I spent 33 years at Liberty Mutual, where over time I had a chance. I started off in claims and worked across the entire insurance life cycle and all lines of business. So, including 10 years of product and underwriting. I worked in loss prevention, managed care, and a large part of it was on the business side of technology. When I left there in 2019, I decided to yet again do something completely different, which kind of became what I love to do, is things I'd never done before. So I spent 3 years at a customer experience automation startup, and then I joined the ReSourcePro family last July.
Amazing. It's you're in a privileged position where you have a lot of deep domain knowledge on insurance, but you have some experience now doing automation, as many of us are trying to do as well. So I'm very excited to kind of dig more into that. So maybe why don't we start with some of the automation work that you've been involved in more recently? Obviously insurance is such a broad sweeping industry. There are a lot of players involved. I'm curious that based on the automation work you've done, what are some areas that are really ripe for new technology to go and at least make some of the process more efficient for everyone involved?
Yeah, I think at the most macro level, the insurance journey, regardless of where you look, is filled with critical, high volume, low complexity activities. And those are such a great opportunity to introduce automation to, as much as possible, free up the most valuable resource any part of the insurance ecosystem has, which is their people, to be able to be more available to, and spend more time on the things that either require that complex human analysis and decision making, which is quite a lot, or the customer, regardless of complexity, or the agent or the broker or the MGA, would like to have that person-to-person interaction.
I love that description. It's high volume, but low complexity. And a lot of that is exactly what AI is really capable of doing. It's taking one part of the role that's high volume away from really the need for humans to do it. They obviously have to do more complex activity downstream, but at least that first leg is more or less automated. It's akin to using a calculator versus doing long form math on paper, right? If you don't need to do it and it saves time, why do it the old way if some of the newer ways are going to add value? So I think that makes a lot of sense. Based on your experience, where are companies, both, let's say on the carrier side, obviously brokers and MGAs, third-party administrators, where are the different parties on that automation journey today?
Wow, I'd say probably when you've seen one in terms of where organizations are in that journey. I think there is still opportunity to really think about that opportunity to be more automated, you being proactive. That continues to be research that comes back, like J.D. Powers just did their latest research on property claim satisfaction. And one of the gaps is that proactivity for carriers that have introduced digital for the less complex property losses. They are seeing that the time to repair is shorter. And yet when they surveyed customers who were in that journey, they still felt it was too long. And so part of it is how to use, and I'll just use the concept of the Amazon effect, where, the Amazon journey or whatever is a great service journey, be it, pizza tracker, with Domino's, et cetera, is you never wonder where you are in the journey. You never have to ask, what just happened, what happens next, when, and is anything else needed from you? And I think there's still an opportunity in so many of these interactions, inbound and outbound, where when something comes in, to set that expectation with the sender, be it a broker, customer, an agent, to say, got it, we'll be back to you with a response, be it a quote or the claim acknowledgement or whatever that is, to say when that will happen. Because I always say, you're late if you don't tell me when. Even if,
Yeah.
even if you have the best SLA in the industry, if I think it's going to be this afternoon and it's going to be 2 days, well, now you're late because you didn't tell
Mhm.
me it was going to be in 2 days.
That I think is it's incredible insight, which I think with Amazon, sort of what the expected response time will be, right? Even if you have a customer support ticket, you'll know the SLA there, and they do a great job of not doing anything that's unexpected. So it's not like suddenly Amazon.com's down, or it's things are, or you can't transact in the ways that you'd want, or if you have a customer inquiry that if you open one that it won't be resolved within a day or so. There's a almost a hidden handshake that happens, and I think that trust that's built with the different brands needs to be felt in every single touch point. I think, and I think that's where obviously people can't be present 24/7, but technology can be, right, and so it could be a huge enabler. Um, I'm curious in terms of where you've seen prior technology be helpful. What parts of the business are people starting to use it where it's like, wow, I thought this was not possible for technology to do, but technology has come in, like AI specifically has come in and really changed to the point where you can't even imagine doing it at some other way anymore.
Yeah, one that definitely comes to mind, and in part because I've just spent the past several weeks diving into it deeply, is intelligent document processing.
Mm-hmm.
The insurance industry probably 20 plus years ago started going to, hey, let's digitize our inbound paper mailroom. And, the insurance industry will never be without documents. Digital or paper, it's not going away. And the data in there is really fantastic. But that initial foray, we went into it, and then we were like, oh, there's still a whole boatload of work by people that's still necessary to get that digital document to the right person for the right claim, for the right policy, for the right invoice, et cetera. And to some degree, almost, I think it's taking longer than if we just gave them the piece of paper.
Yeah.
So, now you flash forward to where we are with intelligent document processing, where with natural language processing and even starting to lean into the high power capabilities of things like generative AI, where now more and more solutions are coming to market where you can truly digitize that wide array of, the hundreds of versions of what a loss run looks like.
Yep.
Like literally there's hundreds of different versions of them, of what that looks like without having to necessarily do thousands of anonymized files for training and or necessarily have to worry about continuous monitoring, accuracy, and retraining. I mean, that's a real progression forward even from the past year or two ago with some of the earlier forays with machine learning. So I think that's a really exciting space that's really going to be taking hold both for submissions, for that vast array of things that come in that need to be mined through, or for a claim. And the piece that's really, I'll say cool that sits on top of that is generative AI's ability to then amass all that information, analyze it, and provide a summary to that recipient to say, here's the thumbnail of what this submission is all about. And here, based on our company's guidelines, here are our suggestions on what you might do with this. It's still very often going to come down to, especially in commercial lines, for a human being to make a decision, but it becomes this, it kind of gets them into this kind of this fence post of, it's somewhere between X and Y of what you want to do with this, which is a huge time saver. And also in the industry, we are in the midst of an ever moving talent crisis, where half of the industry will be retiring by 2036. And the industry, a lot of the carriers want to hire to grow and want to hire experienced people. And it's like, well, if you don't find a way to get that high volume, critical, but predictable, less complex work into an automation path and find a way to at least have automation help train those newer people coming on the desk, you're going to get stuck, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think there are two things that are happening at the same time. There's a demographics piece, which is a lot of people that are in insurance will retire, which means that a lot of deep, experienced talent won't be available in the same way that it has been over the last several decades. And partly it's a function of not enough younger generations getting into insurance and staying in insurance. basically have maybe more outlets, or maybe the insurance industry hasn't done a great job of attracting and retaining as much talent as necessary. And insurance obviously is a staple. There's no world without insurance. So, the challenge is like, how do you fill enough of those roles as more of the population retires? Automation could be part of that solution. So long term, it's not just a nice to have, it's certainly a necessity, right? I think one thing that you mentioned, intelligent document processing. Obviously, in some ways, there have been forms of document processing and intelligent document processing for some time. It feels like there are many companies that are in this space trying to solve this. For the last like 10 years, it's not even the last like 2 years. So I'm curious why this remains still an unsolved problem a lot of the times, and what where the kind of maybe the friction lies. Is it on the insurance business side? Maybe they're not engaging these companies fast enough, or are the companies struggling to get the level of quality and maybe the breadth of coverage that the insurance companies truly need?
Yeah, I think, like with most things, there's multiple layers behind it. I think it's trying to find a solution for the specific measured defined problem at hand, whatever that is, that can rally to the cause, that can wrap its arms around the variability of, you can train off the data you have, but if it's going to crash and burn every time somebody sends in a spreadsheet that has a column or a header in a slightly different array, well, then it's not a solution. It's actually just more of a problem because your process just keeps breaking down, kind of in the old days of RPA. I think there's that piece. The other piece of it is, and it's, easy to say, hard to do, is the recognition that sometimes there isn't going to be one solution that over time is going to be able to span across all the different use cases and or lines of business that you need to solve for. I don't think it's actually a good strategy to do nothing until you measure and map everything, because by the time you do, you have to keep going back and doing it again because the problems keep shifting and changing. So you have to gain like this comfort level of, we're going to go best of breed to solve problem X because we've measured it and we think that the ROI is super compelling and we need to do it. We're then going to, that crawl, walk, run concept, we're going to figure out where's the next place we need to go with, say, IDP. But everybody internally within an organization, across, CIOs, procurement, business leaders understand we may need to go back to market and bring another partner in, because that's, the neat thing that's happened in the industry over the past 5 to 10 years is solution providers are collaborating more and more. They're finding the best of each other and they're coming together and holding hands and bringing these broader capabilities to market. But it means that carriers have to be comfortable with saying that, again, they're not necessarily going to find, a one size fits all.
Yeah. I think those are really important insights. I think the first bit that you mentioned is that the solution needs to be flexible enough so that it doesn't break if you see maybe somewhat of an edge case scenario pop through, right? And so spreadsheets or different column names, maybe something being kind of moved over from one section to another section, right? These things, these are the types of things that humans are very, very good at. They're good at understanding context, even when the context is a bit different than what has been seen in the past. Whereas I think a lot of technology has been built in a way, at least historically, where it expects the input to be in the same place all the time. And even a slight aberration would cause the system to break down. In which case, all of a sudden, things are breaking down often enough because the inputs are messy enough and variable enough that humans are they are being pulled into the action too often. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, you spent a lot of money and a lot of time to get technology in the door, and it underwhelms, and you're paying for that. You've paid for that. It's a sunk cost in many ways, but then it's a tax because the people that you have are still having to do a lot of the work anyways, right? So it's marginally beneficial, could actually even be marginally taxing in the sense that it's actually costing more and adding more friction than it would have been for you just to use humans to do. Yeah. I think where technology is now come into places like Gen AI is very good at understanding more open context scenarios. So if things change slightly, it's fine because these models are very good at understanding documents and natural language, and they can retain that context as they go in and work with it to pull out values and classify documents and such. So I think the technology now is definitely able to handle more of that. But I think the second part is it's almost not a technology problem. It almost feels like it's a organizational problem, which is how do you stitch together different technologies, maybe across different solution vendor, like the different vendors, so you have a holistic offering to go to insurance clients with and tackle more of their workflow, more of their problems, instead of a lot of different point solutions that then you hope that the insurance business is able to stitch together, right? It's adding too much friction for them to go and piecemeal that way.
Yeah, and I think on the back end as well, because any type of automation is a massive change management journey for the organization, for the carrier, the agent, the broker, the MGA. It's a huge change management thing. It's first and foremost begins and ends with people. So it's also thinking about behind the scenes. You're trying to, and we do research, and one of the reports that we do every year is on strategic initiatives. What are the priorities that are driving carriers' investment in technology, and across commercial and personal lines, right to the top, 80 to 90% of the time, carriers said it's all about business optimization. They're all figuring out how to fix on the back end, because they were all about, this is the age of the customer, and they fixed on the front end, but they might have fixed on the front end in a way that didn't think about the 360 loop. And so behind the scenes, it's a bit still of kind of bubblegum and Band-Aids of kind of knitting things together and trying to run as fast as you can. So as you bring in automation, it is that critical opportunity to say, okay, how do we make it so, regardless of what line of business, for example, this particular submission's coming in on within commercial lines, which may in some way all hit at some point down to a same shared services team that may be doing the rating work or maybe doing policy servicing. You want to have it be, they shouldn't have to say, well, this is a workers' compensation submission, so it works like this. But if it's for commercial auto, it's completely different. So you have to think about that as well, because otherwise it's really hard to measure even your cost of doing business if it fluctuates based upon the technology you put in play when that's not driven by the complexity of the transaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. In terms of which areas in insurance, I mean, I know we've mentioned a few, but the ones we often hear are like underwriting, claims, distribution is another one, customer service and customer support is another. I'm curious, like of those and maybe others that you've seen, where is the need and also maybe the appetite the greatest? Because I think the challenge from the vendor side, and like, for example, we're a software vendor here, it's like trying to figure out which part of the business actually has the greatest appetite. Obviously, all the areas will eventually need it, but where's the pull the greatest? And I think that's informative for the insurance people in our audience too, because they're trying to figure out where do they start applying some of the AI capabilities, right? Which use cases do they prioritize first? And I think maybe some of the things you've seen firsthand might be informative to both audiences there.
Yeah, one area we're definitely seeing is the need to embed more of the right data into that underwriting process and as far to the left in that journey as possible, as close, if not within the actual submission process, to be sure that what's coming in is comprehensive enough and validated. So then you don't have to have all these pauses and hiccups or even kind of less precise pricing and risk analysis happening. So that's really, we're seeing a lot of appetite and interest and opportunity there, especially the more you go to, on the one hand with complex, kind of mid to large commercial lines, there's that huge need to do that. So again, the underwriter kind of knows what they're dealing with, because each complex risk is different. Then you start going kind of down market in size and complexity into small commercial and personal lines, and they're trying to, as much as possible, say, how do we minimize the need for a human to touch this before we make a decision? Does this match our appetite? Do we want it, yes or no? And if so, how much? Depending on how much we want it, how are we going to price it? What coverages, what deductibles, et cetera, are we going to put on it? Minimizing the need to have a human touch if, with the right data and the right modeling happening, the technology can get more of that done, and you can get that response back out to the person who submitted it.
Yep. Yeah, and I think in order to do that well, you do need to study what the existing process is. So I know there are a lot of attempts made to have one solution that works across the insurance industry, which is like the traditional way SaaS is done. But I think there are enough differences within organizations and how they look at the data, how they make decisions, that you do need to align with their process. And if you don't, then all of a sudden the people are having to step in and kind of remedy the shortcomings of the software, right? So I think the alignment with the way that the process is being done today at any given company is super important, and I think that alignment and even designing the process well, so the software more or less mimics the same types of critical decisions that are made by people today in those roles. That's a really important step, right? And I think a lot of companies that are trying to solve here forget that level of customization is absolutely essential for the software to really take on more of the volume of activity away from people, so that the same individuals can do more volume with the same amount of effort that they have today.
Yep. And that information needs to be transparent because you still need to be able to audit it. You still need to be able to explain it. You still need to be able to understand it. And if you do that, then that becomes insights that you can continue to feed back in and learn from. This kind of gets into this self-learning continuum that can be happening.
Yeah.
But again, that need to say, you can't just have the magic machine do it. That magic machine still has to be able to articulate what it did and why.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so important. I think that's the thing that we see in proof of concepts, which is the technology works like in isolation on some predefined set of documents or decisions that need to get made. But then when you put it onto production, the things that matter for building trust in the software is that explainability. Can you understand how a particular document was extracted or classified, or how a decision was made? And if that explainability isn't there, then it becomes a black box. It's very hard to develop trust when that transparency is missing. And it's something you don't really think about in a POC because you're looking at maybe just some high level metrics to go and beat. But then when you actually use it in production with people involved, you do need that explainability. And then the feedback mechanism is super critical, which is no software is going to be 100% right 100% of the time. Maybe you get to 99% you get to 99% accuracy on some volume, maybe 70-80%. But being able to help the model become better by having the people, the humans in the loop, go and make changes and then pass that feedback to the model, so the model continues to evolve. That's super critical. Again, you don't really think about that in a proof of concept, but in production, that's the difference between having a good software become great versus a good software just kind of stuck at that good level where there's still too much effort that people have to apply, right? So I think, I think this is something that more and more companies will have to start thinking through, I imagine, as they shift from work in proof of concept land and then ultimately try to get that into production territory.
Yeah, and I think to your point, you brought up that human in the loop, and I do think that that's really, really key. Either even as part of that kind of crawl, walk, run journey, but to really understand, you go in having a certain supposition that we think our full kind of straight through processing or kind of automation level is going to be X, but you really don't know until you do it. To your point, until you really start pressure testing, not only on the happy path but on the edges. You really don't know. And if you're trying to, again, back to that change management concept, if you want this to stick, if you want this to work, you have to be sure that you're hearing your people, the people who are on the front lines, that this is what they live and breathe. This is their expertise. This is what they do. And they need to be heard and they need to understand and they need to weigh in and say, okay, yeah, actually, I don't disagree with that. Or I do, and here's why. And that can go back to, oh, okay, we need to go back and tune the model. That was the scenario we didn't anticipate. So that human in the loop not only avoids you kind of going off the rails and making some really bad decisions, but it also, it earns those champions. It earns that trust that allows that solution to then expand across, because you need to have champions within the organization for this to take hold and grow successfully.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think of AI, and you could kind of slot in any term here you'd like, but if you have new software that comes into the mix, it's almost like a junior employee. You can't just let it run, and like there's no oversight, and there's, you basically need to go and train that employee on what to do well, and what are the areas for improvement. And over time the solution does get better if it's designed well. And then you can trust that employee, because that employee will mature to become more of a senior employee, hopefully much faster than like an actual person would. But that person graduates, that the technology graduates into something that's more mature that you could rely on. But it has to earn that trust, right? And has
Yeah.
to earn through that explainability aspect. And if that doesn't happen, then I don't think there's going to be organizational buy-in to go and transfer really mission critical work from your people that have done it well for a long time to new technology, right? The new technology is a, yes, it's an opportunity, but it's a massive risk, huge
Yeah.
risk,
Yeah.
and it needs to be managed well,
Yeah.
in order for there to be a like really great adoption over the long haul.
Yeah. And I think it's, really coming in. I'm a huge fan of the 5 whys. And it's really, again, at that ground floor, engaging employees. If we're going down this path because dot, dot, dot.
Mm-hmm.
This is the problem we're striving to solve. This is the kind of the magnitude of it. Here's what happens if we do or don't go after this. And the critical part, and what does it mean to you as the individual? Because it is going to change people's roles. And I've had this experience, you probably have as well, going into clients. I've had experiences where no one loved that mainframe solution until we came in and said it's time to stop using it, because they understood it. And we missed, many years ago, we missed that moment to keep them one step behind us as we were going through the journey, to answer the questions and to start anticipating, what does this mean with the cutover? How does your work change? What are workload expectations? If we're introducing more automation into the underwriting process to optimize the value of people that are irreplaceable, then it's going to mean, so if you have to do less block and tackling, hunting and pecking, searching and validating, then it means we expect you to handle X amount of more premium, per month, or, Y number of more submissions, or those types of things. But you're not going to get there immediately. You have to figure out with your input employee, what should that growth curve look like from where you're going to start? Because you're going to get slower initially, because it's all different.
Yeah.
But we have to, let's get a partnership and let's handshake and agree up front that you're going to have this period of time to get to your par level of productivity pre-change, and then what's the next leap that we need you to get to for this all to make sense, and have that dialogue and, hear the concerns and questions, but just to get up front so people can understand what this means to them, because it's really trying to, again, optimize what they're great at. But when people spend 20, 30, 40% of their time in that kind of block and tackling stuff, it's very disconcerting, especially in this current economic climate, if you suddenly say half of your work is going away. People feel like, oh, so does that mean that you're going to eliminate my job? Most often it's going to be, no, we're going to be able to grow without adding more headcount. And that's what carriers are striving to do, is that everybody wants to grow, but they're trying to grow in a way that makes economic sense. And that's where automation, when done well, can play a great role.
Yeah, it's the same thing I hear from our clients and customers. And by the way, this is also true across industry. In banking, it's the same thing. It's that they want to, for example, do more loan origination. The challenge is, how do you hire enough people, train them, and retain them so you could actually process more applications and get quotes out and actually lend more. It's not that they don't have appetite to increase their balance sheet and do more loan origination. It's just that they don't have enough people. And in insurance is the same thing we hear, which is like, they want to do more business, right? And so it's not a cost reduction play. It's not a headcount reduction play. It's enabling the business to do more revenue, and have faster turnaround times for their clients, with the same people that they have today. Because hiring really great people is just frankly very, very hard. And technology can be a huge enabler, but it does change expectations, right? Because the same people in those roles, they might have to do more work. They're spending less effort per, let's say, application or per item in their workflow, but the expectation is that they're doing more volume. And that's something that will require some time and effort to go and also get right. But I'm curious, of the companies that you've worked with, and you've seen, when automation is done, and when some of these individuals are playing maybe more of the human in the loop or some oversight, How do organizations handle that well? Because it does change the role to some extent for these individuals. Obviously, they don't lose their job in most cases, but it does reshape their role. So I'm curious what kind of things you've seen people kind of expand into once automation is introduced.
Yeah, I mean, first off, there's a subset of the people that do the work today that you probably need to at least temporarily pull onto the team that's going to design that future state because
Mm-hmm.
they understand why it works the way it does today. They understand the reality of the art of the possible, as well as the things we're unknown from a compliance perspective. We need to look at that, whatever that driver of the need for that human touch could be. They understand the customer dynamics and the complexities and the regulatory configurations and things that are out there. So there's first that piece of you're going to take some people and figure out which of those people would be great to be part of this core team. And this could become their new career path because you're going to start in one area and then you're going to expand and you're going to grow. And so it's not even necessarily a temporary assignment. So it's really, having those open conversations, really, and even engaging your HR team to think about, am I actually changing someone's job? Am I moving them from being, an underwriting assistant to being a business systems analyst? What am I doing to make sure? And, and talking about that because, McKinsey study says the number one reason that people leave jobs is lack of career growth and professional development. It's lack of opportunity. So it's about how I see companies that do this well when, again, I'm just going to be huge about this change management, engaging people to talk about there's a few different paths that are emerging. You can stay in your current realm and the role is going to evolve to like this. We have this other need, kind of thing. And then who's going to be the people that are going to be on the front line of, of support and maintenance, that can become very business accessible and less necessarily developer and IT dependent in all instances. So there's these new paths and really engaging people to find out what excites them the most. Because I think it's really giving people the opportunity to think about themselves differently. I used to talk to a lot of people and they'd be like, I'm a rater, on the blah, blah, blah system. And I'd be like, no, actually, you are somebody who is an expert in premium calculation. Your areas of specialization happen to be, say, commercial auto and liability as a line of business. And today you happen to do that through whatever that system is. So you have to kind of turn your resume upside down to understand truly who you are, what you know, and what you're great at.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I love the way you framed it, which is initially you actually need to pull in some of the human experts into the design process, right? It's not that technologists go into some dark room, design the technology that they think the business needs, and then hope for the best. You actually need to have really great people on the business side that are actually doing a lot of this work come in and inform the build. And I think that's where the really great partnership happens between technologists and the business people. And then you ship it. And then that's when your work, that's when a lot of the work actually truly begins because then you get real world feedback and it takes a while, right? But when you do get that traction, the fit's really great. It's magical. It truly is. I mean, I've seen this where it flops big time and there's huge disillusionment, but I've also seen it work really well. And then it feels like magic. You can't imagine a world without software enabling more of the work. And I think there will both be I think massive successes and massive failures in the years to come because it's a hard technology to go build right and introduce into business. But when done well, I think the kind of the dividends from doing that are well worth it.
Yeah, I had the pleasure, the luck of moving into technology during my carrier career in an organization that was very we oriented. So you would sit around the room and you couldn't distinguish who were the business systems people, who were the IT people, and who were the vendor people. And that's when we knew we had it right because it was a we approach. We are all in this together. We each, come from different parts of different organizations, but we have a common purpose. We have a shared definition of what success looks like. And we just appreciate that we have unique roles to play to get there, but we all support each other.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious. I mean, that insight is really helpful. But I'm curious for companies that are trying to figure out and navigate this landscape that maybe haven't done this well in the past, or maybe they're newer to this journey. How should they think about getting up the curve, right? And I think part of the challenge that we often see is they're trying to figure out which parts of the business should they introduce AI in. What is AI capable of? Do they turn to the internal engineering team to go and work on this? Do they search for external vendors? If so, like how do they actually conduct experimentation with external vendors? And usually they're trying to figure out some way to get their data environment in order to maybe do POCs, but they're trying to navigate this landscape, right? And I think it is very complex and hard. So I'm curious, what recommendations or advice do you have for companies that are trying to figure out how to do this best without making a lot of mistakes along the way?
Yeah, I think the first thing from my own direct experience, what I've done and what I've seen is first and foremost is within your organization on the front lines is, kind of demystifying all the glitter and the buzzwords and educating your organization on what these different technologies can do. Kind of just really level set. And then ask the front lines to say, now that you understand what's possible, you tell us, if it were up to you, if you could wave a magic wand, where would you start and why? And you start teaching people on those front lines, even to how to do those very, very super high level, kind of almost business cases to really start understanding the yin and the yang, because it's a trade-off. There's an investment for that return. And so really starting there to really kind of, because you're really trying to get to problems, compelling problems, and they tend to be some of the most, like, oh, that's so obvious, but you're not looking for it because you tend to be looking for something that's maybe a little bit more complex and sophisticated. And again, there's so much high volume, critical, but low complex stuff that is ripe to solve for. And so I think it's going there first. And then it is engaging IT, your internal IT partners, and saying, so here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's why. Again, back to the compelling, the business value, because we're all trying to get to the business value to make the organization be better, be bigger, and more productive, more profitable, and then say to them, so how do we go about this? Do we do some like internal hackathons, kind of some internal, really rough, even paper-based POCs within your organization? A lot of insurance organizations have trusted partners, and we always say, start there first. They know who you are. Because that's a piece of the puzzle that companies need to know when they go to market is you need to have extreme self-awareness in terms of who you are as an organization, what your culture is, because you're trying to find an organization that you can work really well with. And so, if you're a really large, organization that maybe is not necessarily known for being, incredibly flexible and nimble, well, then be very careful of pairing up with a very new, organization that you might inadvertently crush. You have to have those very frank conversations. And it really goes both ways. I would say solution providers, everybody wants those great logos, but you don't want one of those great logos to bury you. And so it's really understanding up front, is this a potential customer that we believe we can say no to when we think the answer is no, when we firmly believe it's no, and that they'll listen. If they want an organization that's just going to do what they say, and that's fine, each solution provider has to decide, is that what we want to do? Or do we want to find a partner that we can upfront talk to and say, look, we're going to tell you no when we think the answer is no. We're going to ask questions when we don't understand where you're trying to get to, because we're experienced in this industry. And so when you bring something to us we've not seen before, part of our role is to be very transparent and say, we've not heard about that one before. Let's talk about that before we do it.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's being intentional about where you start and what you're trying to solve, then and then going down that journey with some insight about.
These are long-term relationships. These are marriages.
Yep. Yeah. Right. It's not a small decision. What about the ROI and the impact? Because I think part of the challenge, of course, with organizations also is how much business impact could they expect, and what does impact really mean? Is it more revenue? Is it more better client retention? Is it reduction in expense or kind of expense in different ways? But I think calculating the ROI, making a business case to say, okay, this is going to cost X, but it's actually going to yield Y in impact, and making that as an investment decision. I think that's also a huge struggle. And this is a struggle on both sides, on the vendor side, trying to make a business case, and on the business side, really getting it past procurement and finance, right? So what have you seen work well in trying to at least pin down what ROI could potentially look like, and then also helping define over what time frame, because I think sometimes there's very wildly misaligned expectations on what time frame can you achieve said ROI.
Yeah, I think that's where it's finding those partners that have done it before. And while they may not be able to disclose logos of who they've done it with, they should be able to ideally extrapolate with confidence to say, this is what we've seen. Either, your expectations, potential clients are actually on track with what we've seen in terms of where we think you're going to expect to see the impact and how long it's going to take. Or again, back to that candor, to say that's not the result we've seen. And again, and here's why. Because it doesn't mean that there isn't still a great business case. It just may be a different business case. It may not be necessarily, for example, maybe more revenue, but it might be lower expense, for example. Yep. It might be, again, it's back to part of it is kind of what's the problem that the organization is trying to solve. And so, when somebody says, we just want to automate it, we want to automate X, my first question is why? Because are you solving a problem or are you attacking a symptom? Because that's where I find where those business cases can go off the rails, because they haven't dug deep to say the reason that we're not winning more business is not what we thought it was. It's actually something else back office over here. And so we need to go find a different solution. So I think, again, it's expert partners, need to really kind of force that elaboration to be sure that everybody's on the same page of problem, root cause, solution, expected return, over what period of time. Can we all hold hands and agree that we're in sync? And if we're not, then I think it's pause for a moment, because I from my experience, that's not going to get better.
Yeah, exactly. If you're already misaligned from the very beginning, it becomes hard, right? And I think you do want to give yourself some margin of error, that even if you, let's say, miss the target by 30%, or it takes 30% longer, is there such sharp ROI to be realized that even missing that makes the case worthwhile, right? And I think that's very important. And it comes down to sort of, how much people effort is involved, how much of the people effort could you help reduce through technology? What does that have in terms of impact to the business, being able to basically do more volume with the same amount of effort, or helping reduce some of the operating expense? It's a hard exercise, but it's absolutely a necessary one, because if you don't have conviction, you certainly won't have conviction 3-6 months down the line, where you're in the thick of it and you're deciding, hey, what is this? Why are we spending all this time and effort, right? You need that really visible ROI calculation with you almost at that moment of despair. Knowing that this is a really worthwhile journey, because at the end of this is what you hope to realize. And
I think part of that also comes down to, and sometimes it can easily get missed, is one of my expressions is, what does day 2 look like? What is the post go live operating model? What is the ongoing work that will be necessary, by who, and what will that cost? Because that's a point of the comparison to the current state. Because sometimes it might be, the lift to go live might be pretty heavy, but the payback may be on even just the back office. What does it take to manage and maintain this capability? That's actually where the real lift might be, that could get easily missed, but it really does matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you have a team of loan officers, or underwriters, or claims adjusters, and you help them become better at what they do, but it requires an army of technologists that are keeping the system alive, then you've just kind of displaced the one type of cost to another type of cost, and you may not be as well off as you originally think, right? So the cost of ownership, I think, is really big. I think what does get typically calculated well is the infrastructure costs, or the cost of the model, right? That's sort of the actual the software expenses, direct software expenses, but the cost for the people that are necessary to maintain that software and to address issues and such. I think people don't spend enough time calculating that, at least keeping that in sight. And I think that does make a huge difference when you're trying to think through, well, do you build this in-house and then do you maintain it in-house long-term? Or do you use a consulting firm that might build it in-house, but then will need to transfer kind of the ownership, the operational ownership to you, versus using a software vendor, right? Which might be able to build and then own it. And I don't think there's a clear-cut answer. It just depends on the nature of the organization and the problem that they're looking to solve, right? But I think that that's exactly the right set of criteria to consider when making this decision. What about express claims? That often comes up, particularly for PNC, like auto claims and such. How well has the industry done at making express claims possible? And where do you see some friction, if any, in that today?
Yeah, I'd say what happened a few years ago is we got really excited as an industry about, with things like NLP, to be able to just send us videos and a picture and we can figure out the repair estimate and just send you a check. And the reality was we found is in many instances, it's still not quite that simple. That can still probably get you 80 to 90% of the way there, but there is still that need for that human to look at it and say, based on this, this, and that, my expert judgment is we shouldn't repair this part. We should just go ahead and replace it because that will cost less. Or, ooh, that's unrelated old damage. I can tell that because I'm an expert at damage appraising. And so we need to omit that. And so I think we had this original zeal that it would just be insert magic here, ... in all instances. And we learned, well, it's still a better process. Don't get me wrong. It's dramatically improved. But I think we had this moment of disappointment because we thought we were taking all the people out of the equation as opposed to, no, back to my phrase about, no, we're going to optimize the people that need to be in the process so they will step in for that last piece of it to polish it up, finalize it, and let it go. And it will go as opposed to what initially happened when we started doing all that photo and video damage appraising is the supplemental appraisal volumes went up because the cars went into the shop and sure enough, they missed stuff. The stuff that a human would have said, yeah, when you pull that off, there's going to be more here. And I already know what allowance to add in there, or I already need to know we need to expect we're going to go out on the supplement. We should not set the expectation with the customer. We're going to send them an initial check, but we need to say to them, we fully expect, back to being proactive and transparent, when you take this in to get repaired, the shop's going to need to call us to come back and take a look once they start taking all the parts off because we think there's some hidden damage.
Yep, makes sense. I think AI is just a tool that helps people become better at what they do. And I think the marriage between AI as a tool and the humans that are there, that dance, like that delicate dance is going to be pivotal to making this work well. Because trying to end-to-end automation completely with software without any humans involved, that's a recipe for disaster, especially in these early days where you want to build confidence. You want to help people get better and faster at what they do, but they remain the final points of control. They remain the final decision makers. They do the review and the final rubber stamp because humans are very good at different things than what AI is good at, right? So it's a good complement because some of the things are uncorrelated. Their skill sets are uncorrelated. And I think that ends up becoming a huge enabler.
One thing I just
kind of like the last. Sorry, go ahead, Meredith.
I was just going to interject. The surprising thing is really where I think some of the excitement and power of AI is coming into play is actually on the incredibly complex claims. Because what AI can do, there's solutions that are now in the marketplace that can not only triage and kind of get their arms around that complex loss as it comes in the door. There are solutions that continue to monitor that loss. And that one data element change, that one word that comes in on that medical report, it can automatically tap that adjuster on the shoulder and say, this claim is just showing signs it's about to go off the rails, or it's tracking towards litigation, or this has trending, this is starting to look a little bit like potential fraud. And so I think we tend to think about automation to take care of all the simple stuff. And I think similar to underwriting, where we're starting to see is that embracing of some of the power is to really get our arms around, the 20, 30% that's really, really rough and ugly, when you're dealing with complex injuries and you're dealing with people's lives and livelihoods and, and people's, and their buildings and those types of things where AI can really help catch things that a human being just can't see that much stuff at one time.
Yeah, No, I think that's exactly right. I think the complex cases where AI can do the monitoring and pull in a human to go and investigate is an incredible use case. I mean, I have a lot of experience in anti-money laundering. It's the same thing. It's that when you have lots and lots of data, particularly on transactions that your customers are doing, like let's say in banks or online transactions, the amount of data points you have is so immense that a person can't reasonably find the anomalous patterns and say this is indicative of fraud, given the IP address, given the time of the transaction, the size, given the kind of the pattern of behavior that this individual normally exhibits. Humans are not very good at that, but AI software is very good at that, and it can say, "Hey, this looks anomalous. Here's sort of why it looks anomalous," and then a human can pick it up and do more investigation, right? I think pairing that observability or that observation capability from AI and then introducing that in other areas like in insurance with claims, I think that's exactly right. I think it's another area of great application of technology. When done well, it's a huge enabler, and it's complex. It's not the simple high volume tasks that we were talking about a little bit ago. Well, this is awesome, Meredith. I really appreciate the conversation. Obviously you've been in this space for a very long time and are seeing it play out. I'm very excited to chat with you in about a year's time or so, when hopefully there's more that insurance businesses are doing with AI, and I think we'll see like the huge wins, like where is it being applied well, what are some mistakes that others can learn from. I think that would be a beautiful conversation. I'm curious, where could our audience stay on top of like things that you're doing, things that you're writing about and speaking about? Where could they maybe perhaps learn more about you and what you do?
Yeah, I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn. I'm there all the time. And when I have the opportunity to publish blogs and research reports or speaking engagements, that's where they're going to show up. So I really encourage anybody. That's my community. It's my home.
Perfect. Well, Meredith, we'll make sure to include that in the show notes. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.